I have found that it is usually the little things that go unnoticed or unheard that ruin us. The pernicious fine print, the subtle seductive glances of the spouse and suitor, the vows that seem so simple to fulfill that they are included almost in the background of the contract. We all understand why the words "for the worse," "for poverty," and "in sickness" are there. I think "for the better" and "in riches" should be understood a little more. But we've all read about lottery winners ruined by sudden wealth, or a successful couple torn apart by the temptations of new status. But in health, there was no way I was expecting that. I've always been the kind of person who believes in preparation. It was instilled in me by my mother. My father was a good man, one of the kindest and best I'd ever met, but he could be flighty. From him, I learned my perhaps overdeveloped sense of compassion. Kindness costs nothing, Nate, he would say when we were helping in the soup kitchen or organizing a clothing drive for our church. From my mother, the woman who always made sure our household ran like clockwork, that everyone got to where they were supposed to be on time, that there was never any doubt about our family's prosperity or safety, I gained a deep appreciation for preparation. I have always been grateful to my parents for the gifts they passed on to me. Those two virtues, preparedness and compassion. Right up until the darkest moment in my life, they helped me. Before we got married, Chloe and I talked about what might happen in our marriage. We discussed what our vows would mean to us. We planned what we would do in the event of an unexpected twist of fate, good or bad, how we would handle having to move and leave our families behind, how many children we wanted to have, and when. We talked especially often about infidelity and whether our marriage could survive it. It wasn't that I didn't trust my wife, nor did she trust me, but she was an attractive woman, and I knew she had many admirers. When we met in college, she was a runner, actually a track and field star. In high school, she had set the state record in the 5K and was still an elite athlete. She wasn't the prettiest girl in school. Her face was more prominent than anything else, and she spent her time worrying about race times rather than makeup or hair. But she more than made up for it with a long, slender, tanned and trim body, beautiful green eyes, and naturally curly blonde hair. Yep, I was under no illusions about what chances I had with her, but we became friends sophomore year. I know some guys point fingers and yell "friend zone," but I never thought of it that way. I had a lot of female friends, and because I treated them as friends first and foremost, I had no problem dating. Women seem to appreciate the fact that I acted like real people with them, rather than potential conquerors. And no marketing network compares to a group of female friends supporting their single male buddy. The transition that Chloe and I made from just friends to friends with benefits and, "oh, I think we're dating now," was pretty standard for college life. We were both dating someone else. We both broke up around the same time, and as we comforted ourselves, we started looking at each other in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't some great romance, but it was good for us. In fact, it was great for us. Despite our differences, or maybe because of them, we quickly fell in love. Her drive inspired me to put myself out there in class, and my compassion taught her to be a more generous winner and a more gracious loser. Now, she didn't believe in working out as much as I did, focusing mostly on what she absolutely had to do. But that was usually enough. You don't get up at 4 in the morning to work out without having the desire to plan ahead. I joined her, albeit with much behind, and my fitness improved as a result. The conversations we had about fidelity, vows, and plans as we approached marriage became easy once I showed her their importance. Then they moved into the important enough to take seriously category, as did her exercise regimen. By the time we got married, a year after graduating from college, everyone thought we would be the couple that would last until our golden anniversary and beyond. What's the saying? Man plans and God laughs? Our marriage has been wonderful for the most part. Our early friendship provided us with an easy rapport. We were experimenters, and my tendency to plan things in advance only contributed to that. One or the other of us would pick something we wanted to try, and then I would come up with all the things we needed to do and, if necessary, buy. She was very enthusiastic about the little surprises I arranged for her. Of course, there were problems too. She expected a lot from herself, and sometimes it bothered her that I didn't expect as much from her. I was happy with my life and her, and didn't feel the need to burn myself out on a job or hobby for some relatively trifling improvement in my skills or wealth. Chloe, on the other hand, was the epitome of drive. She didn't compete, but not with other people, which wasn't immediately apparent. She only competed with the Chloe that was in her own mind, the one who could always be better. I respected that, but it meant that sometimes she could be fickle in her moods and disappointed in herself when she didn't achieve her goals. At times I felt like she was disappointed in me as well, but that rarely happened. We had a good life together and good times. She was ambitious and energetic, but we also enjoyed quiet times, in the evenings after coming home from work, after dinner, and doing the dishes. I worked as a software developer and she worked as a salesperson, and these professions fit our personalities quite well. We would cuddle up on the couch and relax, watch movies together, sometimes even just lie in bed on Sunday mornings when I could talk her into it. But more often than not, she wanted to go camping on the weekends. It was during one of these hikes that I first noticed the problem. Since they were supposed to be a form of recreation, we hiked at an easy pace and enjoyed the scenery. I rarely had a problem with the pace, but she never did until that fateful day. Chloe found herself short of breath. When we got back to the car, she complained that her legs were tired. And then it turned out that she had been having these attacks for a long time, but she had ignored them, writing off the fatigue as the fact that she had gotten older and had less time to exercise. According to her, it wasn't important enough to bring it up, but I was immediately concerned. After talking about it, I asked her to make an appointment with our family doctor the following Monday. He referred us to a specialist. The specialist referred us to another specialist. And then we got what was, at that point, the worst news of my life. Chloe has a rare form of muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is not a single disease. Like cancer, what we call muscular dystrophy is several different diseases and disorders that share the same symptoms. This means that treatments, age of onset, duration, and quality of life vary from disease to disease. And when we determined exactly what Chloe had, the prognosis was not good. Her life expectancy was probably around 20 years, and few of them were good. Her physical abilities were rapidly declining, and she required first a cane and then a wheelchair to get around. She became weaker and weaker, becoming more and more easily fatigued, until finally, her body could no longer support its own functioning. My wife would pass away from pulmonary or heart failure before she reached the age of 45. Any chance of us having children was gone. Her disease was genetic, and although she had 2 copies of the gene, even the recessive variant meant that our children could be affected. Her parents were lucky and experienced no noticeable effects, but the thought of us inheriting the disease was unthinkable. However, even if we were willing to take the risk, there was no telling if her body would have the strength to carry and deliver a child if we didn't deal with it almost immediately. And then I would have to take care of the baby almost single-handedly, while at the same time taking care of my wife's declining health. It wasn't worth the risk, and we decided to focus on improving her quality of life for as long as possible. No, we would not have children, and we would never see our golden anniversary. It is the little things that often become our undoing. A submicroscopic sequence of proteins, a small weakness that grows over time, a seed of fear sown by an inexorable end. Chloe tried to look at it with courage, both of us. She wasn't dead, and we were going to live the time we had together to the fullest. We were young, but I had already planned for our financial needs. We set aside some money to travel for a few months, visiting places she had always wanted to visit while she could still walk. It was a wonderful respite from the terror. These trips to exotic places, trying to fit the experiences of a lifetime into the short time she had left. We made love with a frequency and intensity comparable to a honeymoon, knowing that fatigue and weakness would soon steal this ardent intimacy from us. We never talked about it explicitly, but the fear of losing that part of us long before the rest of us hovered in our thoughts. I held her when she first cried, when she couldn't stand without her cane, when her long, skinny jogger legs gave out, when she tried to get out of bed on a cold winter morning. She slid helplessly to the floor, and a terrified sound escaped her throat at the realization that she was losing control of her body, and that it was only going to get worse from here. She had been diagnosed only 3 years ago. "Please, Nate, don't leave me. I can't do this alone." She clung to me as tightly as she could, but her arms were already weakening. Her frightened voice broke my heart. I smoothed her hair and kissed the top of her head. "Shh, love, it's okay. Never. In sickness and in health, until death do us part. I promise, Chloe." That set off another wave of sobs, and all I had to do was hold her until they passed. Then, I helped her to her feet, strapping her to her new hated companion, a cane. 6 years after her diagnosis, she was no longer able to work outside the home and struggled to work inside. She moved from sales to marketing because she simply couldn't maintain the level of intensity her first job required. And for an even darker reason, she found that no one wanted to buy product from a woman with a cane. Image matters, and she began to associate it with illness, which subconsciously repelled her potential customers. I moved on to a new job, still in software development, but in healthcare. I decided that being associated with healthcare gave me a better chance of being included in new clinical trials, and health insurance in that industry tended to be more comprehensive. It brought in less money overall, but not because there was no money in the industry, but because I didn't have the option to just move to another industry when better financial opportunities arose. Our lovemaking came to naught 8 years after my diagnosis, and a few years before that, we were on artificial life support. At first, it wasn't that she was physically incapable. Technically, we could still do it, but as we became more and more limited in our repertoire, Chloe's ego took a hit. As her body changed, she felt more and more unattractive, which added to the damage. I tried my best to tell her that I still loved her and thought she was beautiful, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, I took up with myself manually and tried not to feel bad about it. One night, as we lay in bed together, Chloe asked, Do you want to date someone else? Take, she made some kind of pathetic sound. Have another lover? And I'd be lying if I said such a thought hadn't crossed my mind. But even if my attitude toward infidelity had changed, which it hadn't, there were logistical obstacles that made it nearly impossible. I could hire a prostitute, I suppose, but that was fraught with its own dangers. The last thing we needed was an arrest. And trying to date, or even just make acquaintances, would be impossible if I were honest about my situation. What woman of worth would want to date a guy who was just looking for a part-time job while his wife was dying at home? Hell, even leaving all that aside, I wasn't particularly attractive physically anymore. My muscles had grown a little due to having to help Chloe, but that didn't mean I was trim and slender. I had strong but not ostentatious muscles, covered in a layer of fat due to the fact that I couldn't go outside and do aerobics. The weight gain was exacerbated by the need to cook simple, cheap, and quick meals that were high in calories so I could get back to work or taking care of Chloe as quickly as possible. No, honey, no. I'm not going to do that to you. But, no, Chloe, I love you and I promise to leave everyone else behind. That's what I'm going to do. She hugged me tightly and cried. I'd like to think it was gratitude, but looking back, I think it was guilt. Who knows, maybe it was both. 12 years after the death sentence was handed down, Chloe was permanently confined to a wheelchair with an expensive motor. Our house had to be remodeled to accommodate her. We needed a van with special equipment. There are programs to help with these problems, but they are inadequate at best. Her illness was draining us financially, and we were maxed out on credit cards trying to keep up with expenses. I've resigned myself to watching my wife slowly wither and die, and then either declare bankruptcy or struggle with a mountain of debt for the rest of my life. I'd like to say that I bear it stoically, that I'm willing to pay anything to spend one more day with her, but I can't. This slow march toward ruin, this gaze into a future without hope and a present without happiness, was wearing my soul out. I tried my best to hide it from her, to be as cheerful as possible when we were together. But at night, I would sometimes retreat to a secluded parking lot where I would sit alone and cry. This wasn't how I envisioned my future. Our future when we were young and hopeful and deeply, madly in love. I still loved Chloe, but now there was such a sense of duty added to it that it was hard to draw the line between where one began and the other ended. I knew that part of the reason I stayed with her was because of our vows, because it was the right thing to do. I had a shameful suspicion that it was that, not my love for her, that kept me by her side. I didn't want to be one of those assholes who leaves his wife when she's sick. I'd lost so much to that damn disease, and I didn't want to lose my dignity too. I know that sounds like self-pity, it was. I had to be strong around Chloe, had to try to be positive for her. Her body was breaking down faster and faster, and the end point of that was an early, painful death. I tried to keep that in mind and realized that my suffering was bad, but hers was even worse. Chloe had gone from a vibrant, attractive, athletic woman to a wheelchair-bound burden to those who loved her. She took antidepressants and a whole rainbow of medications to manage her symptoms. She was seeing a therapist. My wife worried more than any human being should, and I needed to shut her out so I could experience my breakdowns on my own time. But they still happened. Yes, her suffering was greater, but that didn't cancel out mine. We started attending support groups around the time she had to move into a wheelchair. One for her, one for me. Her group was geared towards socializing with other people with muscular dystrophy, and mine was for caregivers. We made friends there, some of the first friendships we were able to maintain over the years. In particular, we bonded with Dale and Katrina. Dale suffered from the same type of muscular dystrophy as Chloe. He and Katrina had been married a little longer than us and were a little older, but they understood what we were going through in a way that almost no one else did. Dale and I became fast friends. He, like me, worked in software development and, despite his illness, stayed active. Hey, I sat on my ass all day long using only my fingers for years. What's changed? He had a wry, self-deprecating sense of humor. I knew he was hiding behind it, using it as a shield against the fear and pain caused by the disease, but we all have our own coping mechanisms. He seemed to be very good at it. Within a few years, he became one of my closest friends, and the closest I saw on a regular basis, more like a brother than just a friend. His relationship with Chloe was different from mine, but was perhaps more important. She had almost succumbed to despair that she would ever be the person she dreamed of being. He helped her to see a different path, to channel her suffering for good. She turned her marketing acumen to charity, helping various muscular dystrophy organizations. It was both a pastime and a way to regain her strength. Her friendship with and inspiration from Dale was the main reason Chloe didn't succumb to despair in the final days of her illness. Katrina and Chloe were friends, but not as close as Dale and Chloe. They were the least connected. Dale and I were software developers with nerdy interests. Dale and Chloe suffered from the same disease. Katrina and I were spouses and the primary, often sole, caregivers of our dying spouses. Katrina and Chloe were just friends who had little in common other than what pushed us together from the beginning. Each of us brought something different to our new friendship. Dale's sense of humor, which lifted Chloe's and my spirits. My talent for preparation, which helped Katrina and Dale find places in their routine that could be simplified and streamlined. Chloe's drive, which, once again breaking free, inspired even Dale. Katrina was kind and gentle, which was nice, but what helped Chloe and I the most was her profession. She was a masseuse, and I desperately needed one. As mentioned, after Chloe's help, I was more muscular than when we first met. In her healthy state, she weighed just over 130, but due to her forced sedentary lifestyle, her weight had climbed to 160. It wasn't quite dead weight, but she could only help a little, and moving that weight over and over, often incorrectly, until I learned proper technique, was taking a toll on my back. Katrina helped repair that damage with long, sometimes painful massage sessions that worked out the knots in my muscles, after which I felt like jelly. She taught me how to apply some of the same techniques, and with those skills, Chloe and I were able to regain the lost physical aspect of our relationship. We were both very grateful to our friend for this. Kat helped me with more personal things as well, though not physical. She and I would stay up late into the night talking either in person or on the phone. We became very close. Aside from Chloe, I don't think I've ever had a connection like I had with her. We were two soldiers in a foxhole, confronting an enemy that can never be defeated, and trying to shake off the depression of fighting an unwinnable war together. I have no illusions about the extent of our closeness. After a few years, we began an emotional affair. We shared things we could never share with our spouses, not only because we had no one to share them with, but because we understood each other and our difficulties on a level that no one, not even Chloe and Dale, could comprehend. Many times we talked about our spouses, the pain they were experiencing, and the agonizing guilt we felt for resenting them and their pain. The selfish anger that we never had a life of our own was replaced by a powerless rage that our spouses would soon have no life at all. The voices in our heads told us, "No one will judge you if you leave." And at the same time, we knew we could never live with ourselves if we left. Even the thought of such a betrayal made us even more miserable. We talked about things we could never tell Chloe and Dale, and trusted each other to keep these shared, shameful secrets. We were, in our own ways, intimately and completely connected to each other in a way that our spouses had never been, and it was a source of both strength and even greater guilt for both of us. It was an emotional affair that our spouses knew existed, though neither of us called it that. It was the kindness they did for us, their long-suffering partners. It was one of the few things they could do, a small gift of hope to diffuse our despair. In the back of our minds, we were all thinking about what would happen when Chloe and Dale could no longer fight, and they encouraged our closeness so that we would have someone to turn to in those dark days. During one of our late-night conversations over a cup of coffee, Katrina suggested an option I'd been hesitant to take for a long time. If Chloe said you could find solace elsewhere, why not? I sighed. Because I'm just not cut out for it. I need to feel intimacy with someone. Prostitutes have never helped me with that. She chuckled, those sapphire eyes mocking me slightly. Are you saying we don't have a connection? That bugs me. You know that's not what I'm saying. Taking a sip, I gathered my thoughts, then took her hand and explained. You're beautiful, Katrina. Wonderful. Yes, we have a connection. If it were otherwise, I'd love to explore it. But I can't let go of my vows. She started to speak, but I interrupted her. Yeah, although Chloe says I can. I made vows not only to her, but to myself as well. Katrina smiled sadly, tilting her head to one side. She's so lucky to have you, Nate. I wish things were different. I'm set up the same way. I need a connection, I mean. Dale offered me one years ago, but I never could find someone I wanted to be with. And now you're here, and she shook her head and brought my hand to her lips. Maybe in another life. We were entering the end game of our spouse's illness. It had been 15 years since their prognosis, and we both knew it. The other life might have come sooner than we thought, but it was somehow unseemly to openly admit it. I don't mean that we were stalling, waiting for the invisible monster to take our spouses. We were just friends and had always behaved decently toward each other. But we also knew that, fairly or not, our lives would change very quickly in the near future. And they did change, but not in a way that either of us could have anticipated. A miracle has happened. A technology called CRISPR showed great promise in treating a number of diseases that had a genetic basis. It allowed direct editing of the genes causing the problems, essentially making changes to the body's source code. This method has been successfully used to treat other forms of muscular dystrophy, but we didn't expect a treatment for Chloe and Dale's type to reach the experimental trial stage until it was too late. Their type was one of the rarest and was far down the priority list. But as is often the case in modern medicine, a confluence of money and power changed priorities. The wife of a research prodigy, the son of a prominent venture capitalist, and the granddaughter of a powerful senator were diagnosed. With these personal tragedies came funding and attention, and breakthroughs followed much faster than any of us could have anticipated. Experimental trials began. My work in healthcare and all the connections associated with it paid off. I was able to get Chloe and Dale involved. When I say it was a miracle, I don't just mean that the cure came so quickly. I mean that it was incredibly effective. 1 month after starting treatment, Chloe was already working with a physical therapist to get back on her cane. 3 months later, she was already walking unaided. And after another 6 months, she was on a treadmill for the first time in nearly 15 years. Dale's recovery was just as swift, and we all celebrated victory over the ghost that had plagued us for a decade and a half. Our friendships grew even closer, and we went out again, something neither of us had been able to do in years. We dined, drank, and danced in ways neither of us had thought possible. Katrina and I were a little embarrassed by our visions of what might have been, considering them an unfortunate omission in a moment of weakness when we were both at our wits' end. Nothing happened, but the fact that we even brought it up as a possibility seemed disloyal. When I made love to Chloe for the first time in almost 10 years, it was tentative and hesitant. I'd gotten so used to the idea that I could hurt her by improperly manipulating a limb when she was too weak to resist that I still hadn't fully realized she was strong again. But once we got over those first awkward touches, we dove headfirst into the physical love we'd both been deprived of for far too long. When we finished that first time, there were tears in her eyes and she clung to me. I missed it so much. I missed you so much, Nate. I never thought she was openly crying. I never even dreamed that we could do this again, that I could be the wife you deserve. You, she lovingly stroked my face. I could never have gotten through this without you. You were, God, baby, I don't know how you were able to be so strong. I love you, Nathan. I will love you forever. I wish I could say we made love every night. I would have loved to, but the realities of my abilities, who was no longer in my 40s, the back injuries I'd sustained caring for her, and a body that was neglected by poor nutrition and lack of exercise meant that I simply couldn't maintain the level of giving we both craved. As she recovered, Chloe continued to run. It was then that we learned just how much and how long her illness had lasted. She was fast, and she ran as fast on long runs as she had in college. The disease probably struck her in her teens without anyone noticing. We both suspected that she could have been an Olympic champion if treatment had been available then. The realization that the disease had stolen from her not only the previous 16 years, but also the person she could have become earlier, was a stunning blow. For someone who was so driven, the realization that this opportunity had been taken away from her for so long was even harder. What I didn't realize when it started was that she also started pushing me away. Chloe started training for marathons. I tried to join her, but I couldn't even approximate the pace. Even before my back injury, I was much slower than her, and even though the exercises were helping with the injury, they were still slowing me down. She switched to working out with a group, made new friends, saw men looking at her in a way they hadn't since we were newlyweds, perhaps even with more lust, given her body and stamina compared to other women over 40. Having finally had the opportunity to re-enter the job market, she returned to marketing. The time away from home had taken a bit of a toll on her, but this industry was changing much more slowly than my own. Technology had changed a bit, so had the methods, but the core skills hadn't changed enough in 10 years to take away her knowledge. Within a year of starting treatment, Chloe was already a rising star in her firm. She became a rising star elsewhere as well. In the muscular dystrophy community, she was seen as a shining example of what could be achieved after treatment. She was the light at the end of the tunnel for those waiting for approval of the experimental treatment she had received. We regularly received letters from other people with muscular dystrophy telling us how her story helped them keep hope alive that their suffering would soon end, that they could be the people they had been stolen from. It touched us both deeply, and sometimes I would find Chloe crying at our kitchen table, with a letter from one of her fans clutched in her hand. I was the lesser star, the unwavering and inspiring husband who had led her through the darkness, but we both knew I was a supporting actor in the public version of her life. I was a little annoyed that I was seen almost as a minor figure. When she was interviewed, I would devote a few paragraphs mostly to how I supported her or fought for her to get treatment. If my suffering was mentioned, it was always put in a light that made Chloe look better. Or, if the writer was particularly clever, as a parallel between how my health was suffering and how hers was suffering. Sometimes things I had to go through or things I had to give up were mentioned, but only to add to the overall pathos of Chloe's story. It sounds petty, and it was. But I suffered too, and suffered knowing that I could have walked away at any moment but didn't. I realized that they were mostly mood-boosting pieces, aimed at either the general public or those who were suffering. I understood why there was such an emphasis in them, an attempt to give hope. Detailing the realities of her husband's struggle detracted from that. It wasn't about me. So little. She traveled as part of her job. She traveled to perform. She traveled to marathons. All but the last of these trips were paid for by her work or a charitable organization. Her friends in marathon groups paid for these trips, wanting to take their mascot with them. Men seemed to contribute the most. Our massive debts meant that there was no way I could join her on any of these trips. When Chloe was home, she was attentive, but that rarely brought happiness. Now that she's back to the 100%, no, 110% version of what she might have been if she'd never been sick, which couldn't have been the case even when she was young, she had little sympathy for my ailments. Never mind that they were acquired during her service. Never mind that not all of us have the genetics, except for one perverse allele, or the drive to be a star athlete. She wanted to be on her feet and moving, either literally hiking again or metaphorically trying to make up for the time lost to illness with late nights spent partying like 20-something years ago. I understood that, but it wasn't what I wanted. She had made a miraculous recovery, but there would be no recovery for me. No experimental treatment that would undo the slow degradation caused by time, stress, physical labor, and sleepless nights. Nothing could undo the wear and tear on my body caused by her support. I longed for respite after nearly 2 decades of struggle and tension, when I had sacrificed the best years of my life for her, sacrificed the chance for children and a happy home in exchange for what? For a wife who was never home? For a life that would never be devoted to me, but always and only to her? I deserved happiness, damn it, and if her happiness wasn't in my hands, she should have listened to my needs for once. Sometimes she tried. She couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop indulging that restless urge to try to make up for the decade and a half she'd spent locked up in a cage of flesh. In an attempt to make me happy, she channeled it into our bedroom. The pleasures of her body had been out of my reach for so long, and it was here that she was trying to show me that there was room in her new life for me, and for the joy she would share with me and only me. Chloe was athletic and resourceful. Before her illness took away her health, we never got to do something she had long wanted to try. But even that was widening the gulf between us. Her health was fine. Mine wasn't. And it was driving her to frustration and making me doubt my own manhood. This disparity grew worse as her attraction grew, driven as much by our age as by her growing strength and stamina. She wanted more than I could give, and the frustrating nights spent listening to Chloe's battery-operated girlfriend come to her in the guest bedroom after I failed to meet her needs were extremely demoralizing. At least I took care of myself when she couldn't keep quiet and showered, doing my best to keep her from feeling the pain of my disappointment. She didn't give me even a shred of discretion. I don't know if it even occurred to her to try. On the night of our 20th anniversary, she had just returned from a 2-week business trip. A couple of work trips with a marathon in between culminated in a weekend of inspiring people with muscular dystrophy. Anywhere. I had long since lost interest in the details because she showed little desire to share them with me. But that night, Chloe was home. She was beautiful. It was a huge milestone we weren't sure we'd see, and we both put ourselves out there. Gifts we still couldn't afford. A night spent dining and dancing as she preferred. Afterward, she went to bed with me. "I love you, Chloe." No. She pressed her face against my side, not answering anything. I thought she must have fallen asleep, but she finally spoke. "You're such a good husband, Nate. I hope you know that. I need you to know that. I'm so grateful to you for everything. I could never have—" My wife looked at me, tears in her eyes. "You deserve to be happy, Nate. More than anyone else." Then she made herself comfortable, hugged me tightly, and started snoring softly before I could say anything back. Chloe didn't say she loved me. She said more, but she also said less. It bothered me, but I was so tired and blissful that I let the worry fade from my mind as sleep took over. In the morning, the wife was gone. On the kitchen table lay a letter. On it lay her rings, and underneath them, several folders. With a trembling hand, I picked up the letter, letting the rings slip and roll away, lost somewhere in the morning gloom. "My dear Nate, I'm so sorry. I will never have the words to express how deeply disappointed I am in myself. You were everything a reasonable woman could ask for. And more. Much more. You helped me through the worst thing that can happen to a human being, and I know I couldn't have done it without you. I will be forever grateful to you for that. All of this makes what I have to do now even more monstrous. I need to walk away and live my life again just for myself. I can't explain to you the depth of that need, Nate. I thought I was gonna die. No, I would have died if you hadn't brought me to this trial. Another thing I can never thank you for. But now I have my life and my health back. I know we were estranged while all of this was going on. I also know that it was mostly my fault. But now I see the possibilities in front of me. And I just can't spend another 2 decades with you just because of gratitude and memories of what we once were. I love you, Nate. I always have and I always will. But I no longer love you the way a wife should love her husband. And as time goes on, I resent you more and more. I know it's horrible of me to say or even feel this way, but it's true. It's not fair to you, but neither is what happened to me. And I need to leave our marriage before resentment turns love into hate. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but I need to tell you to make it easier for you to let me go. Even before I was diagnosed, I was already thinking about leaving our marriage. I loved you, but I could see that the goals I was setting for myself didn't align with what you really wanted out of life. When we found out about my illness, I was so afraid of being alone that I didn't say anything. It was cowardly. I am a coward. I know that, and this letter proves it even more. I couldn't even tell you all this in person. You're the perfect husband for someone, Nathan. You were the perfect husband for me for a while. And somewhere out there, you will find a woman who will be your forever love, who will be perfect for you and take care of you the way you deserve. I wish that was me, both for myself and for you. I hope you believe that because it's true. I know you'll probably hate me. I don't blame you for that. I hate myself for doing it. But in time, I hope this hatred will pass for both of us. You deserve to be happy. We both do. But neither of us will be happy if I stay. I want you to know that I never cheated on you. I wouldn't leave you for another man. I was tempted, and that temptation is one of the things that made me reevaluate both who I was as a person and what I wanted out of my life. It also made me think about what I could honestly offer you. But of all the vows I'm breaking right now, this one isn't one of them. I have been faithful to you in this, if not in everything else. Please don't come looking for me. You're so smart, and I know you'll find me easily. I'm not going to hide. But I've taken a new job in California, and by the time you read this, I'll be on my way. I've only taken with me some clothes, a few personal items, and a few mementos of our life together. I can never forget you, but I want to keep them with me as a reminder of the wonderful man I was once married to, and as a reminder to myself of the cost of my selfishness. I deserve that. I also know that my illness has put us in dire financial straits. I don't know to what extent. You have always dealt with these issues. I leave it to your discretion what to do with what property we have left. I have taken $2,000 out of our savings to start a new life. The rest is yours. I know you have talked about bankruptcy in the past. If you think that is best, please proceed. In this letter, you will find the initial divorce settlement offer and power of attorney. My attorney has been advised to give you whatever you wish and to follow your instructions on how to proceed financially. He is pro bono, so his time is limited, but he will help in any way he can. I know I'm hurting you. I wish there was another way out for you. I hope that in time you will remember me fondly. I will always think of you that way. You were always the rock I could lean on. I only wish I could have been the same for you. With gratitude and sadness, dear Chloe. Forever didn't last 2 years. I sat there for I don't know how long. The sun was already high in the sky and I could perceive the world around me again. Tears were streaming down my face and my palms were bleeding from the deep cuts made by my fingernails. You damned bitch! I roared angrily, getting up and flipping the table over. Like a wild, wounded animal, I thrashed from room to room, breaking everything in my path, smashing our wedding china, knocking over tables and chairs, inflicting more wounds on my arms as I smashed picture frames with blows from my bare hands. When my strength left me, long before my rage took over, I sat down on the wreckage of our house, the wreckage of my life, and wept. By then I was bleeding profusely. Not life-threatening, I think, but enough to realize I needed treatment. I called the only people I could rely on. Katrina? My voice was too weak to hear. Nate, what's wrong? Help, please, Kat, help! And then I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. He and Dale got me there. The injuries weren't too serious, but I would have to get stitches. My friends thought at first that I was the victim of a home invasion. They figured Chloe was on a business trip and someone had broken into the house and trashed it. But when I could talk, I told them the truth. At first, they couldn't believe it. It was such a shocking betrayal and completely inconsistent with what they knew about her. But when they brought me home, I was able to find the letter and envelopes among the trash strewn about the kitchen. Katrina screamed, "Oh shit! How could she?" While Katrina ranted, Dale just sat with me, quietly supporting me with his presence. It was the flip side of their usual personalities, adding a bit of surrealism to what was happening. When Kat finally calmed down, she went and packed a bag for me. There was no way they would leave me alone in the state I was in, and in the house. Dale drove me in my car to their house and Kat stayed behind to clean up. She told me later that she tried to call Chloe's cell phone to tell her what she thought about it, but my soon-to-be ex-wife had already disconnected the connection. I stayed with them for several months, only occasionally returning to the house to salvage a few personal items, clothes, computers, and other necessities. Chloe downplayed the seriousness of our financial situation. I planned to talk to her about declaring bankruptcy a few weeks after our anniversary, not wanting to mar the holiday with bad news. It worked out wonderfully for me. When the dust finally settled, we were left destitute and with a completely ruined credit history. Chloe already had a new rental apartment and a company car in Los Angeles, and the bankruptcy didn't affect either. She could continue to live there, away from me. I was so distraught when she left that I didn't even bother trying to find an apartment before the bankruptcy. Looking for a new place would have cost me far more than the first and last month's rent and security deposit. I kept the wheelchair-accessible van. The family who needed it got it in a direct exchange for their slightly newer sedan, and they cried tears of joy. I had saved them tens of thousands of dollars. It felt good to do something for people who really appreciated it. Katrina and Dale worried about me. I would have worried too, but I didn't have the energy even for that. I sank into a deep, dark depression. None of it mattered. My life didn't matter, nor my compassion, nor my preparation, nor my sacrifice. My wife lived, I kept her alive, treated her, and was there for her. And all I got in return was the equivalent of praise followed by a cosmic screw you. Being around my friends was painful. I tried not to think about what could have been. Not about what could have been with Chloe, because it was pretty clear now that it could never be. She was too much of a narcissistic bitch. But when I saw Katrina and Dale exchanging kisses and winks, the tiny caresses of two people grateful for the second chance fate had given them, I was ashamed to admit that I wished it had been me with Kat instead. That was the plan. That was what I was preparing for, even if only subconsciously. One day, Dale and Chloe would be gone, and Kat and I would be together. Maybe. Maybe. But it wasn't going to happen now. I watched the second woman I'd ever loved end up in the arms of another man, my best friend, and I couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that I was alone or the fact that she was gone. I tried to hide it. I was so grateful to them for picking me up and helping me through the worst time of my life. Worst time of my life. It's funny how there are new ones popping up all the time, but they were my dearest friends and they knew my moods. There was no way I could hide the pain from them. I just tried to pretend it was all about Chloe. But it wasn't working. One night, Dale and I were sitting with a group of friends. He was trying to distract himself from my thoughts by playing video games. Now that he had his strength and motor skills back, he was trying to catch up on the years of classics he never got to play. It was a good distraction, and I agreed. But on this night, as on most nights over the past few weeks, it didn't work. He hesitantly said, "I know you and Katrina. You had plans for what happens afterward." Afterward? When Chloe and I don't get better. Before CRISPR. Huh. Not plans, really, just we weren't thinking that far ahead. Just tried to put one foot in front of the other. He grinned. That's what Katrina did too. She and I talked about it, and I gave my blessing. He looked away. And I can't imagine that you, the king of training, didn't at least think about it. After a moment's hesitation, I said, I'm glad that as bad as I feel, I'm glad you're together. That things worked out for you. And it did. It hurt, but Kat was happy and Dale was happy. Even if I stayed on the winning side, I still couldn't wish them anything but good things. He smiled. Yeah, but Dale still wasn't looking at me. But the offer still stands. It's not. I can't let Kat leave me, but if she and you. He finally looked at me. Without you, we wouldn't be together. Without your support, we might not have even gotten to CRISPR. She was dying inside until you came into her life. I don't know if she would have been able to stay with me until the end. If that sentence is any consolation to you now, if being with her physically would have been. He swallowed. It's okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What? Dale nodded. She loves you as much as she loves me. I know that. And I know that. That we both owe you a lot. I love you too. You're like the brother I never had. And every good thing you do makes you less happy, and neither of us can take it. Dale, I can't. Shaking his head, he continued. I don't want to know. When it's going to happen, I mean. I've already talked to Kat. She knows I'm blessing you. But don't tell me about it, okay? I know you won't try to take her away from me, that—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "It's okay. If anything happens to you, it will. Without you, we couldn't be together. We won't get hurt, really, I promise." My friend walked out of the room, his face reflecting pain and determination. I sat like that, my head spinning, until I finally got up, turned off the light, and went to bed. For weeks, nothing happened. Neither Dale, Katrina, nor I discussed the subject again. I tried to treat it as a memory, a sincere display of love and gratitude that I could never realize. He loved me enough to suggest it. I loved him enough not to continue. But that détente was broken unexpectedly early Saturday morning. I was bothered again by my back, which wouldn't stop hurting. Dale wasn't home. He'd left with his cycling group, probably before lunchtime. Katrina noticed me stretching on one side. "Need a massage?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Dale's suggestion made me pause. Kat hadn't given me one since Dale and I had talked that evening. She chuckled. "It's just a massage, Nate. You don't have to do anything more than that." I blushed, which made her laugh. "Come on, you know how to do it." But I realized where this was going and said, "Kat, we can't." She smiled at me. "We can, Nate. It's okay. I love you." But she wasn't mine and never would be. She belonged to Dale, and I knew that would ruin them, no matter what each of them said. If things had gone the way we expected, before the treatment, I would have loved her for the rest of our lives. I knew that now as firmly as I had ever known anything. But it hadn't. And so I loved her, and I loved him, and I loved them. No. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said, that single, lonely word. She stopped. "Nate?" "No, Kat, we can't. I won't." Sitting up, I nudged her upright. "I love you too, as much, no, as I've never loved anyone. If only— if things were different, yes, I would." I chuckled. "Well, it's best not to elaborate, but I'd love you forever." The words sounded hoarse with sadness and unsatisfied desire. "Why?" I smiled sadly. "You know why." Kat shook her head. "He said it was okay. We talked about it. We love you, we both do. It doesn't have to be—" I kissed her, then pulled away. "And how did that make you feel?" The woman I loved looked away. Shame reflected on her face. "This isn't going to work out, we both know that." She closed her eyes and nodded pitifully. This was going to be too much. We'd be too much. Too much to limit ourselves to just a physical relationship. Too much for her marriage to survive. She didn't love me any more than she loved him. I had to cling to that conviction to stay strong, and I loved them both. I wanted them both to be happy, and that meant I would have to suffer alone again. We talked to Dale before I left. I let him know that it was a mutual decision, that we hadn't gone any farther than a brief temptation. The relief on his face and hers showed that I had made the right decision. They helped me pack up the car, hugged me tightly, and we all barely held back tears as we said goodbye. I cursed my father's lessons and the foolish notion that kindness was worthless, leaving behind the last people I loved, a new city, a new job, a new life that I hoped would be better than the one before, a new future with nothing left of my past but misery. The betrayal of the woman I'd married, the heartbreaking disappointment of never being able to be with the one I loved. Deprived of all comfort, I wallowed in darkness. I spent the first year after moving out obsessing about my ex-wife, trying to find a way to hurt her and ruin her life the way she had ruined mine. And with some success. Now, rumor had it that she was going to be one of the faces of a marketing campaign for the treatment that saved her life and ruined mine. The letter she left me was circulated far and wide. I paid a search engine optimization firm to make sure it showed up in the top 10 results when her name was searched. The press secretary job never showed up, and her public appearances seemed to have fallen flat as well. There wasn't much I could do, however. I kept up with news about her, occasionally checking her social media. When she announced her engagement to a venture capitalist, I made sure he got a copy of the letter. They were married anyway, so it didn't have the proper effect. I was happy to note that they divorced a couple years later and that he cheated on her. In the years that followed, I took comfort in the fact that what happened to me was by no means uncommon. We were called CRISPR widows, a group of long-suffering spouses, mostly women, who were abandoned by their partners when treatment gave them back the strength they had lost years or decades before. The typical scenario most cases followed was very similar to Chloe's, something like a midlife crisis on steroids. Men who had missed the vigor of youth and suddenly gained a semblance of it years later, abandoned en masse the women who had given up their youth and health to care for them. However, as with many things, there was more nuance than this simple scenario. Sometimes the breakdown of the relationship resembled what many single spouses suffer from. Without a common enemy, an illness to keep them together, they drifted apart. And sometimes the caregiver, long unhappy in the relationship but remaining in it out of a sense of duty, decided she'd had enough and left. It got so bad that the phenomenon got a more clinical name, and mandatory family counseling became part of the protocol for taking various CRISPR drugs. It helped me too late, but I was glad to know that what had befallen my marriage could be prevented in others. It was a dozen years before I saw Chloe in person again and for the last time. On one of my increasingly infrequent visits to her social media pages, I learned that she had terminal and inoperable cancer. I reached out to her, finally breaking the radio silence I had been in since our divorce. Her response was immediate. She asked me to visit her at her expense. It was the little things that began to bother her again. The quickly overlooked warning about increased cancer risk due to CRISPR, the ignored persistent cough, the tiny black spot on her X-ray that had grown and spread before it was discovered. If she had never left me, I would have continued to monitor her to make sure she underwent the additional tests needed. However, now she would die alone and unloved. It was a 1,000-mile journey to her last appointment, which she had cowardly refused when she left. I ignored her offer to pay, deciding to do it on my own terms. When I reached the right floor of the hospice, I stopped, took a few deep breaths to calm myself, and knocked on her door. Chloe was almost unrecognizable. Even during the worst days of her battle with muscular dystrophy, she hadn't looked this weakened and exhausted. Death hovered over her, a companion that I was sure would take her traveling with her soon after I left. Nate. A faint smile lit up her face. Thank you, she coughed. For coming to see me, She wheezed some more and reached for the small cup next to the bed. I limped toward her, leaning on my cane, a cheap, scratched hollow metal rod with duct tape on the handle. My clothes, moldy, stained, and threadbare, dangled loosely on me, and she looked at me sadly and anxiously as I came closer. There were ice cubes in her cup. I took one out and brought it to my lips. My ex-wife took it into her mouth with an appreciative sigh. We never got to that stage until she was cured, but I knew the rhythms and patterns of end-of-life care from friends who had passed away without waiting for a miracle that might have saved them. There was a chair next to her bed, and I sat down, releasing the tension from my back with a quiet groan. She spoke again. Nate, I owe you. A soft, husky laugh that turned into a coughing fit. I owe you more than I can say. But most of all, I owe you an apology. I shook my head. No, Chloe. You owe me 20 years of my life back. But I never seem to get that, do I? I didn't try to hide my anger. I think it surprised her. Very sick people so rarely experience other people's rage, even when quite deserving of it. After a pause, Chloe continued. I know. If things were different, if I could do things differently, I would. Please believe me, I would. That's easy for you to say. She snorted. Please, Nathan. You've always been so kind. I don't care what you need. My ex-wife recoiled slightly. I'm not kind or compassionate. I can't be like that anymore. You took my compassion, Chloe. You took it and you killed it. And with it, you killed me. Her eyes grew moist. No, Nate, please, no. My voice was barely stronger than hers, but the rage gave it menace. Yes. What did you think was going to happen, Chloe? You told me I wasn't good enough, that I was never good enough, that you played me and abused my love and trust? I laughed bitterly. I used to think that when you begged me to stay, it was just fear of death. But then I realized it was because you'd leave me if our positions were reversed, didn't you? She couldn't meet my gaze. I've never been as strong as you, Nate. No, you weren't. You're a stupid, selfish bitch. I took a couple deep breaths. When you left me like that, God, I hated you. Hated you. But it was more than just hate. She pulled away from me. You destroyed everything good in me, Chloe. My compassion, gone. What's the point? There's no justice in the world, no real kindness, at least not the kind I can believe in. How can I trust another woman when my wife lied to me for 20 years and then a weak reply escaped her lips? I loved. Shut up, you treacherous, worthless, cancerous whore. I was afraid someone would come in and stop this, my last moment of retribution against this demon in the flesh lying on his deathbed, and tried to change my voice again. My training? None of that matters, not in the slightest. I married someone whose loyalty and love I was sure of, and she was not. I planned a happy family that we could raise together. Illness ruined those plans. I did my best to keep our finances together during your illness, but we went bankrupt. I tried to surround us with friends who knew what we were going through. I lost them because it hurt too much to be around them after you were gone. I even, through clenched teeth, I hissed, I even planned for the future, planned for the possibility of another love after you were gone. And even that, was ripped from me because of that damn cure. The cure I found for you, the cure I worked hard to make available to you. You lived and betrayed me. Her husband lived, and I couldn't do that to him. And now the woman I fell in love with, the woman I loved so much more than you, is forever out of reach. She was openly sobbing now. She expected that with the years my pain would dull, that I would become the gentle and kind man who had cared for her for 2 decades, not a madman ranting at her bedside. I leaned back, relaxing slightly, not out of kindness, but out of fear that her heart might give up before I could finish. I left the town we lived in together shortly after you did. I had nothing because of you. Not one damn thing. You stole everything from me with your selfishness and cowardice. I spat out, I wish you were dead. Chloe barely managed to squeeze out between painful sighs. Please, Nate, don't say that. If you were dead, I'd at least believe that my suffering meant something, that they were worth something. I wouldn't have known you'd been lying to me for 2 damn decades. But instead, I looked away. Instead, I'm just counting down the time until I die. She whispered, You didn't find anyone. I was sure you would, that you would find someone who deserved you. You were so loving, so beautiful. You could have. Of course I didn't find you. How could I build love without trust? Hell, how could I build friendship without trust? And how can I trust anyone after what you did to me? No, Chloe. The only intimate time I've had since then has been with whores, sluts like you. But at least I knew I was paying for their time, and they never disappointed me when they left. Oh, Nate. Oh, God, I'm so sorry, babe. My gaze returned to her. Don't ever call me that again. You can't pretend to love me. You can't pretend to be sorry and sad, like you have no idea what you'll do to me. You're selfish, Chloe, and you're a monster, but you're not stupid. She lowered her gaze to her frail, gaunt hands. I thought you were so sweet, so nice. Sincerely thought you were. Her jaundiced eyes returned to mine uncertainly. You were always strong. I thought you broke me. No one can be that strong, Chloe. No one. I barely forced myself to stand up, looking at her with a smirk. I wish I'd never met you, Chloe. That we never got married. That I left you when you were diagnosed. Nate, The smirk turned into a snarl. I've long wanted to leave you crying on the floor the first time you fell. Push your wheelchair down the stairs, smother you with a pillow when you were too weak to fight back. That's what I think you deserve, Chloe. I chuckled as she cried. But now I'm glad I didn't. I was wrong. You deserve to suffer immensely for what you did to me. I turned to leave and, waddling and shuffling, headed for the door. Before I opened it, I half turned to her. I hope you last a little longer, Chloe. I hope it's excruciating, the pain you feel counting down the hours. If you want me to be happy, survive as long as you can. She groaned as I opened the door and stepped out. A nurse pushed me as I ran past toward my ex-wife's room. Stepping outside, I stood up straight. My back was killing me. It was my own fault for that prank with the cane. It rarely bothered me now except when I did something stupid like pretending to be a cripple to drive my ex-wife crazy with guilt. I won't make that mistake again. Before heading home, I turned in my clothes to the donation center. It was my old casual suit that I started wearing when I was gardening. Marion had been urging me to get rid of them for a long time, but we didn't need the money. The cane was a gift too. It had belonged to my wife's ex-husband, but he no longer needed it. I met Marion at a support group for widows of CRISPR victims. She had peacefully separated from her husband when they became estranged after the fight ended. They were still friends, but the spark had faded. He had attended our wedding 6 years earlier and was still in our lives as an excellent second parent. I was notorious among the widows. I was one of the few men whose wife had left him in this way, and also one of the few who had so spectacularly voiced their displeasure publicly. They all dealt with their anger and bitterness in their own way, and it was through their support that I found the help I needed. Marion was at the top of the list of those who helped me. We became friends first and then grew to love each other as I learned to trust people again. Dale and Katrina were at our wedding. I couldn't keep in touch with them at first, it was too hard. But as I started my new life, I reached out to them. Dale and I still played online games together, and Katrina and I talked to each other from time to time. Marion knew about our past, but she also knew she was my future. There was no jealousy in her, only gratitude for the woman who had been my beacon during the darkest times of my life, and for the man who was willing to risk his happiness for mine. Marion and her ex-husband had children before they learned of his disease. His variant was recessive, and they were lucky it hadn't been passed down. Thad and Terry were wonderful kids, almost in college already, and I had to restrain my desire to spoil them. To be honest, I didn't fight back very often. What I said to Chloe, if it wasn't clear, was a mixture of truth, innuendo, and outright nonsense. I really did have all those feelings for her: rage, hatred, and a desire for her to suffer. After leaving town, I tried to find a counselor to help me deal with the pain, but they all seemed to want me to forgive her. It didn't seem to make sense. How could I forgive a betrayal of this magnitude? This wasn't a spouse who cheated in a moment of weakness or let his alcoholism or depression turn him into something awful for a while. This was a narcissistic monster who stole half my life from me. No. Eventually, with the help of friends in my support group, I found a psychologist who understood that different people need to deal with massive betrayal in different ways. I couldn't allow myself to become consumed by hate. That became my first goal once I stopped isolating myself from others. Ultimately, I wanted to find love again, even if it seemed like an insurmountable task. I was lonely, lonelier than ever, and I was going to do something about it. So together with my psychiatrist, I planned, prepared, talked, and worked. The tool I found and with which I created for myself was simple. I had heard the saying, holding on to hate is like swallowing poison and expecting it to kill your enemy. I couldn't let go of hate. I just couldn't figure out how to do it, and I wasn't sure I even wanted to. Instead, I mentally pictured a bubble, a poison green bottle with a cork, in which I kept my angry thoughts about Chloe. At first, I found it hard to keep them there, to keep that poison in a safe place, away from everyday life. But as time went on, this simple mental exercise became easier and easier, until the hate began to seep out only when I wanted it to. So finally, I took the vial and shoved it down the bitch's throat. I whistled happily as I paced down the street, enjoying the bright afternoon sun. Soon I'd be on a plane, back to my love and foster children, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The hatred was no longer just contained. It had finally left me, and the future opened up in front of me. I took the time to thank myself for the many little joys in my life. Sometimes, it really is the little things,